now from New York, sports journalist Tal Heinrich. Tal, great to have you with us. Now, those allowed to compete under this neutral flag, they first need to be selected. What needs to happen before that can happen?
It's a great question, Tracy, because we don't know the full process yet. The entire procedure hasn't been published, and I don't think that many people actually know in detail what's going to be there. But according to the president of the Russian Olympic Committee, here's what he said today, that some working group will be formed in Russia, and as soon as this Friday, it will meet with representatives of the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, and there they will discuss in greater detail the criteria that Russian athletes need to meet in order to attend those games in South Korea. We don't know how many Russian athletes we're talking about, but again, according to the president of the Russian Olympic Committee, potentially around 200 Russian athletes will be able to compete, but the decision is, of course, not a decision that will be made by the Russian Olympic Committee. It will be made by the IOC. They are the ones that will decide who can perform there and who cannot. As far as the Russian state, Vladimir Putin, Russian president, he said that the country will not stand in the way, will not limit Russian athletes who have the criteria and want to go to South Korea and attend the games. But want, I think, is a key word, because I'm sure that some Russian athletes might reconsider under the circumstances whether they want to participate or not.
Absolutely. Now, officials in Russia, they're saying that the punishment is unfair and could harm athletes that weren't, in fact, implicated in any wrongdoing. I just want to bring this into the conversation as the International Olympic Committee was making its decision. A young athlete from Russia took to the podium, and this is what she had to say.
In 2014, I was 14 years old. I had not even entered the senior national team of my country. For me personally, Pyeongchang should become the first chance to experience the unique atmosphere of the Olympic Games. I always believed that the opportunity to compete at the Olympics should be fought on the ice. Unfortunately, now I understand that I can lose this chance because of circumstances that do not depend on me in any way.
So, Tal, to you then, does the punishment fit the crime?
Well, it depends who you're asking, Tracy. Russian athletes, as the one that we just heard, are really disappointed. You know, athletes work the entire year, for years, you know, to perform and be at their best at a particular time. And some of them really have nothing to do with this cheating, doping scandal. So for them, it's a major blow to their entire career, I think we can say. And they see it as a collective punishment. At the same time, I think that the official Russian response, if we're talking about Vladimir Putin or even the spokesperson of the Kremlin, he said last week, he called on Russian to avoid any emotional response. And I think that the official Russian response to this punishment was a bit restrained, I think we can say. And this is why some critics, they claim that there might have been some behind doors deal between the IOC and the Russian Olympic Committee to enable Russian athletes to still compete. So some things that it's a bit too lenient, and that this punishment is not a real deterrence looking towards the future of Olympic Games, because once these winter games are over, you know, we just move on.
And just briefly, Tal, before we have to wrap it up, when has Israel been in a similar circumstance where it has had to, it's been able to compete but been deprived of its identity with the national anthem and all of those things played?
Well, we need to distinguish. We're not talking about any kind of doping scandal in regards to Israel, but you are right. And I think the latest example would be the Abu Dhabi Grand Slam, the judo competition in which Tal Flicker, the Israeli judo star, won the gold medal. He stood there atop the podium, and the Israeli national anthem was not being played. And that's because sometimes Israeli athletes do compete in certain countries that do not have any kind of formal ties, diplomatic ties with the state of Israel. So there we see certain problems, and I think that also maybe we can compare it to the situation of certain Israeli Arab athletes, that sometimes they don't want to take part in international tournaments and represent Israel because they don't identify with the Israeli flag or the Israeli anthem, so they choose to stay out of this.
All right, Tal Heinrich, thank you so much for that insight from New York City there.